Now we'll look at the Oz next. The biggest story they've got here is hydrogen key to net zero target. Former Chief Scientist Alan Finkel says the export opportunity that clean hydrogen presents Australia is almost beyond imagining, as he backs Scott Morrison's technology-driven approach to securing the 2050 net zero emissions target. With the PM leaving on Thursday to attend the G20 summit and Glasgow UN climate conference, the government's special advisor on low emissions technologies warned Australia would need to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels, but that hydrogen presented an extraordinary opportunity that could rival natural gas. Now, a lot of people have crapped all over this technology-driven plan, but people like Alan Finkel are not duffers. And when you have the former chief scientist saying that this is the right way forward, I mean, is he an idiot, Gemma?
I suspect not. I suspect not. And I think, this area is so fraught, isn't it? Because there are competing, as with any policy area and as with any big ticket policy items such as this, there are competing interests, there are competing stories, there are so many moving pieces in play at any given time. But as you say, this bloke comes to the table relatively unencumbered, right? So I think it's an important conversation for Australia, because we've been stumbling along this road for such a long time because of the politics of it. And when ideology overtakes something, overtakes pragmatism, for example, in an area like energy and in an area like energy efficiency, I'm somebody who doesn't believe in plunging people into energy poverty, Caleb, for the sake of ideology. I think having honest conversations about emissions and targets need to include nuclear as a genuine, seriously considered option in this country. And unless and until we do, we're really just tinkering around the edges.
Yes, and former Governor of South Australia, Kevin Scarce, will agree with you on that. He wrote a very lengthy report into the use of nuclear and nuclear waste in particular in SA, and found that we needed it. But speaking of sort of partisan politics getting in the way, Albanese gets blue-collar warning is this other yarn on tomorrow's Oz. Veteran National Union leader Michael O'Connor has warned that Anthony Albanese and the federal ALP face a blue-collar voter backlash, try saying that 3 times fast, at the federal election over the Andrews Labor government's disgraceful treatment of timber workers. Mr O'Connor, the National Secretary of the CFMEU Manufacturing Division and ALP National Executive member, said Scott Morrison and Federal Labor's opponents would use Victoria's sick joke, quote-unquote, of a transition package for timber workers who've been made redundant as a live example of why Labor nationally could not be trusted to properly assist workers in exposed industries. Now, we saw what happened to Bill Shorten at the last federal election, in large part due to blue-collar workers up in Queensland. Do you reckon the ALP could be heading in the same direction this time?
Well, Caleb, for all of the talk about Conservative politics having somewhat of an identity crisis in this era, and I think you could successfully argue that not enough has been spoken about the same identity crisis that is facing the Labor Party. The Labor Party used to be quite clearly and by definition the party of the worker and the party of the working class. It hasn't been that for some time. And the further to the far left that the Labor Party lurches in terms of policy and representation, the more absorbed they get in pronouns and gender identity ahead of cost of living and the concerns of everyday families in Australia, the further south their primary vote plummets. This is just a fact, a statistical fact that anyone can, with 5 minutes, can Google online. So, yeah, I think this is a problem for Mr Albanese, but not just in the context of this example, but more broadly. And when you've got member Christina Keneally being parachuted into a safe Western Sydney seat, for example, that's a great example of what I'm talking about, how Labor is facing its own identity crisis. If the powers that be can't see that that's a problem and why, then maybe they need to continue to stay in the wilderness until they work out how deeply disconnected they are from their roots.